Today I'm going to be talking about codes P1273 and P1283 exclusively to Nissan. I've been getting a lot of questions recently regarding these codes on how to diagnose them and how to get them gone for good. And I've got a pretty good solution and diagnostic step and procedures that I take to get those resolved. Kind of tricky codes. Basically bank 1, bank 2, stuck lean. If you have a 4-cylinder, you're just going to be getting the P1273 code. And the tricky part is if you don't do the self ratio clear in the ECU for the air to fuel ratio, if you don't clear those values out of the ECU, you can actually get the codes to come back, even though you may have found a vacuum leak, a bad O2 sensor, a bad exhaust gasket. About 80% of the time, generally, I see bad exhaust gaskets. Maybe it's a cracked catalytic converter where some oxygen's getting into the O2 stream, and the computer sees a discrepancy between the primary upstream O2 sensor and the downstream O2 sensor. So I got my little OTC Encore that I use. It's pretty handy, but the first thing I like to do is the easiest thing, and that's just to check all the vacuum lines, make sure there's no obvious vacuum lines disconnected, nothing that goes to your brake booster, of course your intake manifold. Check all those. That's just the easiest part. Okay, so the second thing I like to do is go ahead with the engine at idle. I like to look at short-term, long-term fuel trims and our O2 sensor voltage. Basically, I'm just going to see if there's any vacuum leaks. These codes, since these codes indicate a lean condition, they can indicate a vacuum leak, but not always. So let's go ahead and start it up, get your vehicle up to operating temperature, and what we're going to be looking for is a positive number in our short-term and long-term fuel trims. As soon as we go into closed loop, there we go. And as you can see, short-term is upwards around 20. So the next thing that we can do is once we confirm that our short-term is pretty high, that positive number of positive 20 is basically the ECU saying, okay, we need to add additional fuel and a positive amount of fuel to combat a lean condition. So next thing I like to do is go ahead and just spray the intake manifold and the engine bay down with some starting fluid. If there is a vacuum leak, that starting fluid will get sucked into the intake and we'll see our short term start to come down. You'll see that with the starting fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and get out and we're going to check that out. So just going to start spraying it down. Make sure to spray around the clamps of the intake boot, and as you can see, our short term is pretty much staying the same. Not much variance. So now that we can conclude that we don't have a vacuum leak, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our oxygen sensor, bank 1 sensor 2, which is the downstream after catalytic converter sensor, and that's pretty much no voltage there. That's pretty dead. I don't like seeing that. I'm going to go ahead and test the voltage at the connector, and I'm going to go ahead and lean that we do have a bad bank 2 sensor 2 sensor. I'm going to jack this thing up in the air, inspect for any exhaust leaks. That's something that's also very common with these codes. Exhaust leaks will be picked up by the O2 sensors, and the computer will think that the engine's running lean. So definitely make sure to check any if you have an aftermarket header or aftermarket catalytic converter, any leaks or any gaskets that are blown out will definitely cause this code. So I'm going to go ahead and inspect the rear O2 sensor now. Alright, so I went ahead and installed a new O2 sensor. This is the downstream sensor, and I couldn't see this just underneath the vehicle, but once I started turning it, something's actually hit the O2 sensor, which might be causing it to act up. And as you can see on our scanner here, we do have bank 1 sensor 2 now has voltage, and it is oscillating like it should. It's just not saying stagnant at 0 volts. So now that we've actually confirmed our problem, the only thing that's left to do is to clear the learned fuel values in the ECU, and unfortunately just clearing the codes won't do this. If we don't clear the learned fuel values, we could actually have the same exact check engine light come back on. So it's a pretty easy procedure. First thing we're going to need to do, turn the vehicle off, make sure it's at operating temperature. Find your mass airflow sensor, it's next to your airbox, and disconnect it. Next thing we need to do is we need to go and start the vehicle for at least 5 seconds or until the engine light has come on. And as you can see, it has. So now what we need to do is turn off the vehicle, turn on the ignition, and what we're going to do is we're going to check for codes. All right, and once we have confirmed that our check engine light is on, go ahead, pull the codes. What we're going to be looking for is P0102. Once we've confirmed that that is active, go ahead, go back to your mass airflow sensor and plug it in, make sure it snaps. We're going to go to clear code with the ignition on, and once we clear the code, make sure nothing's there, we're going to start it up. We're going to let it idle for 5 minutes before we move it. After this, we should have cleared all of the learn fuel settings in the ECU, and that way your code won't come back. There is a good chance that if you don't do this last procedure, your code, even though you fix the issue, whether it's a vacuum leak, a leak in the exhaust, a bad O2 sensor like in my case, it will come back. So make sure you guys do that. If you guys have any questions or any comments, leave something in the comment section. I hope this video has helped you out. If it has, please like and subscribe, and I'll check you guys out next time.